In all of these little things that we're doing, we are seeking to know better the heart of God and our community and where our neighbors, where their hearts open up. And if it doesn't work, it's not a failure. We learned something.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us again on the Rural Renewal Podcast. We are really excited. Later on today, we are going to have Jamie McMahan come and talk to us. She was a great interview talking about some really neat stuff our church is doing. If you've been wanting to hear from somebody who will give you creative ideas about how you can do really practical, in many ways, simple things to help people in your community know that you care about them, that you love them. She just had amazing ideas and amazing energy for how that can happen. So she was great. I'm assuming you agree with me, Kathleen.
Oh, totally. She even gave me some ideas of things that I want to implement at our church. And
I know I need to take notes.
I feel like we do an okay job of.
Yeah.
I totally needed to take notes, but I loved the energy she brought. And so it was a great conversation about how to connect with your community and to show that God is good, and in really practical ways. And I really appreciated what she had to say.
Yeah, I think if you're a rural ministry in any sense, or just a ministry in general, and you're thinking, how can our church get inspired to do some really practical things in our community to help build up our community and to help our community know that God loves them and cares about what's going on in their lives. This is the conversation to really help you with that. So that was really cool. I really appreciated it. With that being said, we're going to talk a little bit today before we get to the interview. Today we're recording on June 12th, which for Kathleen and I is a relatively significant day. I should say more than relatively significant. It's our anniversary today. Why we're recording a podcast, it was when we could fit it in. We're not recording the podcast all day, so we promise we're not spending the whole of our anniversary doing this. But this particular year is kind of significant because we were married in 2004, which means 2024 is our 20th anniversary. So happy anniversary.
It is. Happy anniversary across the screen. Yeah. But isn't that life? Like, you can't just stop and do nothing on your anniversary, even if you want to.
Yeah, sure. No, it is. It is. No. So we thought we'd talk with that in mind. We thought we'd talk a little bit about the nature of being married and in ministry. Obviously, the way that it has worked, that God has worked it out in our situation, is not how God works it out for everybody. That would be true for, I guess, anybody could say that. But we're talking a little bit about how God has kind of called us together, and hopefully talk a little bit about the importance, I do think, of especially, and this is true anywhere in ministry, but of like figuring out how to be on the same page as our spouse about ministry and what God is calling us to, because we obviously are called both into the ministry in our church, but lots of pastors are called, and their spouses are not necessarily called to pastoral ministry at all. But we're still definitely kind of called to to some sort of role, and so how to navigate that as a family. So not that I don't pretend to be an expert, except that we've tried to figure it out for 20 years together. But we are going to talk a little bit about it. So Kathleen, how has this sort of worked out in our lives?
Yeah. So when we got married 20 years ago, we were not planning on being pastors.
That's true. Neither one of us.
So, we were Christians. So, and we were active in our churches, but this was not in our plans, at least in the near future. But shortly after we got married, God just made it abundantly clear, especially to Chris, that he was going to be a pastor. And it was only with meeting with our pastors and some pastor spouses that they were like, Kathleen, like, you're in this together. Like, it's not just going to be Chris doing ministry. You're like, whether or not you have a title, you're going to be doing it together. So it took me a few years to figure out what God wanted for my life. And I'm actually feeling like He's still revealing that to me, almost.
I mean, I think you should.
20 years later.
Always expect that God will continue to further reveal what He's up to in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we don't want life to be boring.
Yeah. And so I think we had to navigate, like, we didn't go into marriage thinking that this was going to be our life plan. But I think we just always saw each other doing life together. And so doing ministry together just made a lot of sense for us. But in doing that, we have to, like, it takes a lot of, like, communication, a lot of work to not just be ministry partners. Because that's an easy role to get into. So this morning, we went out for breakfast because it was the only opportunity that we were going to have to be able to spend time together. And so it was breakfast, and it was lovely to get to spend some time with Chris. But we tried to, like, trying to carve out that time is something that we've done well sometimes, and other times we've had to work really hard. Yeah. I can think of seasons, when we were building the church building was a season where ministry was hard, and it was a lot of work. And so we had to figure it out. But our youngest, her name is Priscilla, and that was very intentional because we love how Priscilla and Aquila did life and ministry together. And I feel like that's kind of what you and I have done throughout the years.
Yeah. That for whatever, that's just how God has called us. And I think we've basically since from not the entire beginning, because like I said, it wasn't necessarily the plan, and certainly ministry wasn't even the plan. And then even the very beginning of our call, I think it was kind of came to me first, but from quite early on after that, and it's only been confirmed again and again from God that part of how He's called us particularly is that we're called to kind of share in ministry together. The way that God has gifted us complements one another relatively pretty well, and so that has been a real blessing and a real joy. It's not how even all people who are called in ministry as couples together. We've actually known a lot of other ministry couples who kind of were obviously on the same page about what God was calling them to do, even ones that have served in the same church, but didn't necessarily have didn't kind of envision it in the same way that we do. And I think that's perfectly fine. Obviously, God's going to call you according to the gifts that you have, and to your spouse to the gifts that they have. And in some of the stuff, certainly some of the stuff that we've learned about in doing ministry together is just important for people in terms of marriage too, right? You have to find certainly ministry can eat up our time, but any kind of work that you do, whether you do secular, some sort of secular work, if you're doing work for the church, it can eat up the time that you need. You'd have to find ways to focus on your spouse. Obviously, again, we have definitely done that well at times, and not perfectly at other times. And I think when we don't do it well, we recognize it, because all of a sudden, what is often like one of the most joyful things in my life, my marriage to you, can get challenging. Yeah, you just have to find ways to try to make that happen. I do think it's important, whatever calling you have with a spouse, includes your spouse in some regard, and that's really true in rural situations. We have really close friends. Who only one of them is, he's a pastor, and she's a teacher actually, but have a really shared understanding that he was going to be the pastor, but that they were called in ministry together. I think, and I think in a rural place, I think churches are probably better, not always better, but often better about thinking about ministry spouses. And in this way, you could maybe even say, kind of in an older sense, pastors' wives as in a defined role, and that can be really complicated. Churches are better about not doing that, I think, in ways that were unhealthy. I think we all have heard those stories of, like, you showed up and, like, the pastor's spouse, particularly if it was a woman, was thought of as, like, she would do these specific things. She'd play the piano, she'd run the women's ministry, and she'd do, two other things. And for some women that was amazing and, like, a good thing, but for some women that was, like, not really what God was calling them to. So it's setting those things aside. There is going to be expectations of, like, you are going to be in ministry together. It doesn't mean you have to fit the stereotypical role of that, but you do have to recognize, I think, in a rural place, you're just going to be, and that's again probably true in more suburban and urban settings too. But I think for us, obviously in our case that was obvious from the beginning, because God was literally calling us to share in ministry. But I think it's an important thing to work out. If you happen to be in a thing where you think of, what is God calling me to? It is something. One of the few things I would say you really have to figure that out, not just on your own, but with a spouse. If you're married, obviously, if you're not married, then you can figure it out on your own.
Right. And I think it's easy to put expectations on a ministry spouse. And so trying to figure out and communicate well with each other and with the church. If those are reasonable, those are within your giftings. If your expectations are higher than someone else at church, sometimes spouses work and have full-time jobs, and so they can't do the types of stuff that the church might want them to do. And so and sometimes it's a personality thing. Like God calls us each to do something, but not not the same thing. Like if you're introvert, like evangelism might not be your thing, and to expect someone to, just because they're like a spouse of a pastor, to participate in something specific, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's hard sometimes, like when you actually get to the real when you're actually in the experience in a church setting, because we have expectations that we don't even realize we have until we come up against challenges in that. But I think like overall, like it's just been a joy to serve with you, Chris. Like I love that we get to spend most of the time together, and I'm not sick of you, so that's amazing.
I'm glad to hear that. I also am not sick of you now.
That's great. I love it.
I would say the other thing, one of the things that's been healthy for us about Fresh Expressions, and you think about doing some ministry things that are non-traditional, it is a way for us now, whereas we're so connected, especially with like kind of the traditional church, the inherited church, I should say, I'll use Fresh Expressions language, inherited church situation that we're in. So much of that we do together, not everything. And we have things that we do separately, but some of the fresh expression-y kind of stuff that we've done over the years, some of it we've done together, that too, but some of it we've done kind of separately. And that's been really healthy for us to have spots where it wasn't the two of us, because as much as God has definitely called us to ministry together, there's some places where it is nice to kind of use some of the gifting we have on our own, or to be creative about that kind of stuff. So that I think is a good thing. If depending on how you're called with your spouse, that's a place where you can use some of that creative and different kind of experience through Fresh Expressions to maybe, if you don't get to do stuff together, you can find something you like to do together and start a fresh expression around that. Or maybe if you're doing everything together because you're kind of weird like us, then you can find some things that you can do separately, which is not a terrible thing. As much as it is great to be together a lot, and we are, and that's amazing. It's also important for us to have some of our own stuff. So yeah, and everybody's got to figure that out in marriage. So.
Oh, totally. It's always interesting. And then you put children in the mix, and that's a whole nother level. But I think in general, there's something a little bit different about being in ministry and how it affects your marriage and how your marriage affects the church. And so, but it can be a really beautiful thing. And so I think we can celebrate that God calls us in different ways and different seasons. And so anyway, I hope that you enjoy this conversation that we had with Jamie. I found it really, really helpful, and we hope that you do too. Today on the podcast, we have Jamie McMahan joining us. Jamie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your church, and your community?
Sure. Jamie McMahan. I have been pastoring a we have around 120 Sunday mornings, small American Baptist church in the town of Belfair, Washington. Belfair is about an hour and a half west of Seattle. So there are some things west of Seattle. And on the Olympic Peninsula, which is fairly close to Seattle, but culturally speaking, couldn't be more different from Seattle. And so we're an unincorporated town, which means it's kind of hard to get a population count. But it seems that in our general area, which is pretty widespread, there's somewhere between 10,000, 14,000 people. My church people live basically an hour in any direction. Just the nature of rural communities and people spread out. So we're not really an in the middle of nowhere kind of church. We're only 20 minutes from a ferry line that goes to Seattle. But it has more of a small town feel as folks have kind of moved farther west over the years to make their own life in what used to be logging communities. A lot of just hardworking people that make their home in places like Belfair. And so I've been here 9 years, got married 3 years ago to my husband, Guy. He's our church worship leader. So he's just a volunteer leader, but he's been leading worship here for 20 years. Oh, wow. And then we had our first child. My son, Miles, was born a year ago, a week and a half from now. Wow. So we're about to have a 1-year-old birthday.
Fun.
Yeah.
That's great. And
that's exciting.
It is interesting to say, certainly that not so much the church we're in now, but the churches we grew up in, more and more, we're like almost 2 hours kind of north, or hour and 45 minutes north of Boston. And to see the creep of kind of people who will travel longer and longer distance. I definitely knew some people where you basically worked in the city, even though they, which is a crazy commute. But I definitely hear that of as cities, kind of as suburb areas creep further and further out. Sometimes you deal with that in rural settings. So,
yeah. Totally.
Yeah. It's great to talk to you today. We are excited to hear. We've heard a little bit, or just you sent us some stuff about some of the really neat things that you do as a church and creative ways that you reach out to your community. So can you, as a church in the Pacific Northwest, how does ministry and outreach look in your particular culture?
Sure. Yeah. So the West in general, just kind of has in its DNA a bunch of folks who, for some reason, were trying to get away from everybody else and do it their own way. And even more so, places like the Pacific Northwest. And so we are in a culture that is historically unchurched. I came from the Bible Belt, grew up in Texas, went to college in Oklahoma, seminary back in Texas, and my first roles on a church staff were all in Texas. And so totally different from that, where you might meet folks in Texas who were coming back to church, or maybe it was the first time for them to bring their family to church, but at least their grandma had gone to church back in the day, and they may have gone to vacation Bible school once or twice as a kid. They at least knew that Easter was about Jesus. Where, up here, the folks that are coming into church, the majority really are first generation churchgoers. It's not in their family foundation, even back to grandma or great grandma. And so that makes ministry really exciting and also challenging because people don't have church experience. For one, they have a lot of questions, a lot of skepticism, a lot of cynicism about the church. And so that keeps folks away. But when folks do come in, they also don't have a lot of church baggage. They don't have stories of hurt and deconstruction. You kind of get to be the first people to introduce Jesus and the gospel, which is exciting. The question is how to get them from the cynicism to that first step into the door where it's not so scary and not such a weird group of people trying to tell them how to live life, because Westerners do not like that. So because of that and understanding that is our culture, our church really has this heart of, what can we do all year long in a way where we are just consistently the inviting, welcoming, loving, good, kind, beautiful presence of Christ in our community. We have a few big events like every church does each year. We have a big trunk or treat, and we are in the town Christmas parade and all that. But those aren't really the heartbeat of our church's mission. It's more of how can we show our community every month, ideally, multiple times a month, in just these gentle nudge sort of ways. This reminder that just says God is here and God is good and God loves you. And there's a community of people in this community that care about you. We try to say, there are no gimmicks. We're not trying to manipulate. We don't have an agenda besides we just want you to know you're loved. And so we do a whole lot of small, subtle things all year long that hopefully lead more to transformation than just a few big events each year.
You have all the people who at one point left where we are in New England and who wanted to get away. Although Vermont was always sort of we were sort of the first places those people went, but then the people, they kept leaving. And so we often, it's funny to just kind of hear that reflection. Although it's led to kind of similar results, because here in Vermont, certainly as well, a lot of people who have very distant family memory, maybe of church, but in many ways very just sort of unconnected to the gospel. So, which again, yeah, you're definitely not wrong in that leads to a lot of beauty of being able to kind of help people navigate what it means to have faith, but also there's a lot of that sort of introductory work as well, and then that early discipleship work.
Now, I know from experience, and also I've talked to a lot of rural church pastors, that rural churches don't have unlimited funds usually to use for evangelism and outreach. Can you share with us some creative ways that you've been able to connect with your community?
Sure. Yeah. I think so. I did a doctorate program at Portland Seminary, and my entire focus of my thesis, my dissertation, my research was moving from a culture of scarcity to abundance. And as a small church with limited resources, how do we not foresee what we don't have? But how do we instead see what we do have and begin to imagine what in the world the living God could do with that? And a lot of that question really comes from Jesus and multiplying the loaves to feed the 5,000. You know, he got, according to John, one little boy's lunch. And rather than look at it and hold it up and say, like, really, God, this is it? You know, the very first thing he did was he took it into his hands and he gave thanks for what was. And so I think in our church, we've really begun with just this, I don't want to sound cliche or cheesy, but like this attitude of gratitude, of saying thanks be to God first for what we do have. Our budget barely runs in the black any given month, but we do have 120 people, in this space every week with hearts that are willing to be used. We do have wonderful facilities for people to gather. We do have within this space unlimited skills and life experience and the stories of the people. And so one thing that we really emphasize is that our greatest work of mission is not any one project we do, but it's the people of God coming alive to the story of God unfolding in their lives and being willing to simply tell that story as they live out their lives. Our people are our greatest mission project, right? And so releasing the people of this rural community to see their inherent value, their worth, their story of transformation, and help our people learn to articulate that, name it, celebrate it, be excited about what God's doing. That happens all day, every day as folks go work at the naval shipyard or in the schools or, the cashier, Safeway. That is our church on mission. But we have done so many things that cost from $0 to $100, and we use social media a lot. That's a really cool thing about a small town, is that the entire town is on the town Facebook page, unlike Dallas, where I came from. And so any initiative that we do in our community, I mean, it's all over our town's Facebook page, and right there, 14,000 people see it. Which is more than the population of our town. So people's grandkids are on there too, I guess. And so, for example, Easter a few years ago, we just did this simple, we called it a Signs of Life photo challenge. And we opened up to our whole community. It was not just based on our church. And we just said, it's spring and it's Easter time. And as Christians, we celebrate that this is the time when, God created life out of death, when God did something new, when we thought everything was done. In your own life this spring, this Easter season, where are you seeing life come from death? Where are you seeing something new happening? Take a picture and put it on this Facebook thread. And, we'll just go on the number of likes. And by this date, whatever picture has the most likes gets a $100 gift card. And in a town like ours, where there's a lot of poverty, $100 gift card is like, sign me up. And so we had a huge response and tons of pictures and people in the town liking people's pictures. Most submissions were not in the church at all. And the end of the day, the lady that won was a Wiccan. like her Facebook page was all about Wicca. And she won our Signs of Life photo challenge. And so, we had a local self-professed witch that went out during Easter season and saw where there was resurrection and new life. And it was beautiful. And we celebrated that. And I mean, that cost us $100. There's a lot of things like that, utilizing social media, which I love and hate. But it can be really nice that every little thing we do, even if few people come, the invitation is seen constantly. During the summer, we usually on like a Monday morning, we'll have what we call like just free donut coffee drive through on us. And we'll say like, Mondays are rough. Monday mornings, nobody wants to get up and get going to work. Our church is on the main road through town. And we'll say this morning is on your way to work as you're stuck in rush hour traffic. Pull in, grab a donut, grab a coffee. No gimmicks. We're not going to make you pull over and let us pray with you. We'll just say, have a great day. We love you. Have your coffee, have your donut, and go on. We've seen when we do that, maybe 15, 20 cars actually come through. 1,000 cars pass by. Many cars honk and wave, but on Facebook, 14,000 people have seen the invitation. And so a lot of things don't actually cost a lot of money. It's just this continual being visible over and over and over again, saying we're present, we're here, we are for the good of our community. We want to make your day better because there's a God who is with you, who is good, and he loves you. And so we just want to do a lot of good things that show his goodness over and over again.
Yeah, I think in places where, and really anywhere, there's places where there's a lot of people who are cynical about what faith might mean, because for some very valid reasons, and then some maybe reasons that are pretty misconstrued. But when we have the opportunity to speak into that and basically say, no, we're here, and when we genuinely want the good of our community, want your lives to be blessed in a way that it can really speak very powerfully to people, even whether they're cynical or not cynical about the church. It speaks very powerfully to say, no, this is at least, at the very least, this is a group of people who are interested in me and interested in our community being more of a community and a better place. And there's so much power in that, and probably untapped resource. And rural communities can be like that. It used to be rural communities were super tight because they were so cut off from the rest of the world. And one thing, at least, that we experience here is, a lot of people who recognize that where it's not as tight knit a community as it used to be for a lot of reasons, because rural communities, like everywhere else, have become more transient. Even I'm not as transient maybe as an urban area, but they are more transient. And so people feel the sense of disconnection, I think, and they don't want it, but they also don't know what to do about it oftentimes. And so I think when the church can be a place to say, both we care about the community and we're going to provide little ways that you can be community in a healthy way too, because oftentimes the community that gets created in other spaces is often kind of based around, not always, but a lot of times based around negativity and that's not helpful either. So the church can really there's a huge opportunity for the church there. And it's really neat to see the way that you all have leaned into that and found some real fruit there. So that's awesome.
You talked about Easter. Have you done any other events or activities or, things on social media during holiday seasons?
Yeah. And that's when a lot of our big things happen naturally. So we do trunk or treat. We do a big harvest dinner at Thanksgiving where we have Thanksgiving meals we've fed 500 the last several years that come through. Ever since COVID, it moved to a drive-through style, and turns out more people want food not in your church building. They like it outside more than inside. And so we just continue the drive-through style. But so we feed the community at Thanksgiving. And then Christmas, we always want to do something special for the community and try to think a little bit outside the box each year and keep folks expectant of what it's going to be this year. And so one of our best Christmas gifts to the community was a few years back, we partnered with 4 local coffee stands, Pacific Northwest. We've got coffee on every corner. And so we've got a couple Starbucks in town. We didn't partner with Starbucks. We really wanted to bless the small businesses. And so there's 4 local coffee stands, and we went to each of them and said, hey, can we give you, I think it was like maybe $500 each, maybe 1,000. I can't quite remember, to cover people's coffee until it runs out this morning, until this fund runs out. And all we ask is that we'll give you a nice tip. We left a nice tip for the baristas, knowing that people got free coffee all morning. They might not be tipping. And so we over covered that part. And then ordered some custom coffee sleeves that just said, "For God so loved the world, Merry Christmas from Belfair Community Church." And so it didn't say, "Come to Christmas Eve service on this day and this time." It was just simply this idea that at Christmas, we celebrate the God who took on flesh and moved into the neighborhood. And what we asked, what would it look like for the people on their way to work, on their way to the carpool line, on their way to drop kids off? What would it look like for them to just unexpectedly be about their normal morning routine and all of a sudden receive this gift of, "Hey, your coffee this morning is free." And there's this little message to just remind you that God so loved the world, and he loves you. And it's just a very simple thing. And the coffee stands were over the top excited to do it. And so, and they all, I mean, we're a small town. And so just that small amount of money, I think the whole project was less than $3,000. Nobody ran out before the morning coffee rush was over. So everyone that went through the line got their free coffee. And there were just words of just, gratitude and celebrating the season all over Facebook. And people wrote thank you cards to the church for a $3 cup of coffee. But I think it was just surprising to them to see that that's it. Like it's just Merry Christmas. Enjoy this from us. We're not asking for anything in return. Just know you're loved. That was a lot of fun. And whenever things like that go well and the community really gets blessed, it's fun to see the people of the church get excited. And then, they want to think about, well, what can we do next? And so to see the people of the church having their own dreams is the best. It's the best.
Well, and I think what I love about it is that there was no invitation, because I think a lot of people who aren't part of a church, that they think we're all about just trying to get them into the church building. And
Exactly.
so just trying to create connection points with people in the community, I think is powerful. It doesn't feel like the church has an agenda, that we just care about people, and which we do. So I think it's a reflection of what we are, who we are. But I think trying to work against we're just trying to get you into our church building is really a good thing. So I love that story.
That is so important to us, because we just sense in our community, people are so skeptical of what the church is about. And they totally assume that we're up to something. We're not quite what we say we are. And so it's all these little things that just keep saying over and over, no, we just want you to know that there's a God who loves you. If you come to our church, awesome. If you don't, please just know this. Like, it's about you. It's not about us. It's about you. And what we just long for you to know is true about yourself. So that is the most important thing. And I love hearing the people of the church now, when we talk about what we're going to do, some will be like, now that sounds a little gimmicky, and they would have never said that. They would have never said that 9 years ago. And so I just love that they're thinking that too. Like, people are not tools. They're not to be used. They're not our project. They are brothers and sisters. They're human beings made in God's image. And we would love to have them be part of our community, but we just want them to know who this God is, who's really with them and for them.
Now, how did you get? Was that all? Were people always kind of on board with that, or how did you get? As a church, did you kind of grow into that? I would imagine, and like I said, I don't know your church entirely, but a lot of churches, there would be maybe some skepticism about like some of these ideas and things like that. How did y'all grow through that and figure that out and kind of come to the place where now it seems like it's something everybody's really excited about?
Yeah, I think it's just constantly, as the leaders, articulating what we're doing and why we're doing it and why it's worth it, why it's faithful and responsible. And so we've done things that haven't gone well, or where there's been like zero response. Many things we've had plenty of times when we tried a thing in the park, and we're just going to be present in one of our local parks and give out free hot dogs and free bubbles and beach balls, and we came back home with a bunch of extra hot dogs and bubbles and beach balls because no one showed up. We've had all, but and even in those opportunities, there's so much about how we, as the leaders, make sense of that, and sharing with the church, like, this is not a failure. Like, in all of these little things that we're doing, we are seeking to know better the heart of God and our community, and where our neighbors, where their hearts open up to what God is doing, where they get excited, where they feel the invitation. And if it doesn't work, it's not a failure. We learn something, we learn something, and that's helpful. And so it's really talking up the people, like, wow, you took a risk. You showed up on a Saturday. You made yourself a little bit vulnerable. You allowed your tithe money to go to a project that didn't pay off as far as we can tell. But how faithful was that? I mean, how often do the disciples end probably any given day thinking, is this all worth it? Like, what the heck are we showing up for? There's more people walking away than joining in our little tribe. And yet they showed up to Jesus again the next day. I think in John 6 about when, the crowds are following Jesus because he just fed them all. And then he starts preaching weird things about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And then they all walk away. But the next morning, the 12 were still there. Yep. And those days when you're like, what the heck are we doing? We're keeping our eyes on Jesus, and we're trying to just keep setting the table. And sometimes nobody comes, or sometimes our table is a mess. But we're playing a long game here. And so we keep showing up together. And so I think so much is how we, as the pastors, as the leaders, tell the stories of what we're doing here, and what's a waste of time, what's not a waste of time, what's always going to be worth it, what's faithful. Since when is taking a risk and it not going right bad? That's awesome. We took a step of faith and we learned something. Cool. We won't do that one again, but what could we do a little differently? So just the language has really helped. Yeah. And also what we do are just simple things. It's a lot harder to have like this massive event where you spent tens of thousands of dollars and you've worn your whole church out, making them volunteer for some play part, or to, stand at a stand for 8 hours on a day and then nobody shows up. That's a lot harder to build morale back up. But our things are like, hey, let's try this for an hour on Saturday, or hey, can you put this up on your Facebook page, or, hey, let's go out and be a blessing in just this really kind way this morning that really can't fail because we're just being neighbors. And so in a way, you're not asking for a ton of investment. You're just asking for folks to have fun loving their neighbors. And that's not that hard to get people to sign up for that. They just need some ideas of what that actually means.
Yeah, definitely. I love the, and I've heard this from a lot of, when you hear churches who are good about continuing to try new things in terms of outreach, the permission to be, or that failure isn't failure, that it is something, that it is an opportunity to learn and grow, and that it's, there's no expectation that everything is always going to go exactly how you might have it in your mind. And matter of fact, almost nothing will. But because I think that kind of mindset, and I think it kind of almost goes back to that mindset you're talking about like of not having a mindset of scarcity, where if you have a mindset of scarcity, you're like, well, we invested whatever it is, even if it's just time, but we invested this and it didn't go the way we wanted, and so now we've lost that. And it's but to recognize that no, you have this abundance from God, and that even if it doesn't go the way you want, there's huge value in what you've learned, and you just kind of keep taking. And I like taking the small chances. Not trying to do more than we're able to do in whatever church sizes we're in rural places. And we always like to say, a lot of rural churches are not all rural churches are small, and not all small churches are rural, but a lot of rural churches are relatively small, and so we often it's not good when we kind of get our stuff caught into trying to do some things that maybe larger churches can do and can take a chance on, and that's great that they can. It's what a blessing and what a good thing. But at the same time, lots of little things. I love that. Just all of us should find ways to kind of emulate that in our churches. So
yeah, and if our heart is really the transformation of people's hearts as they come to know and love Jesus, and not just, we did this event and 500 people came, check. If our heart is transformation, and we look at the life of Christ, how lives were transformed over those many small things together with him. It was the times around the table that transformed. It was those who walked with him from just town to town. I mean, the feeding miracles, and those people quickly walked away. They were amazed for a moment, and that was a big check. We did a great outreach this day, but there wasn't transformation, and he knew that when they came back for breakfast. He's like, I could feed you again, but this is not getting to what my heart is about. My heart is about your heart being changed. And so what we might see is a deficit of the smaller church. We can't do that. We can't drop 10,000 Easter eggs from a helicopter. Darn, but we can have some wonderful meals around the tables at Easter time, and we can easily invite the people right around us into these gatherings, into these meals, and believe that time around the table is part of transformation, that telling of stories is part of transformation, that showing up every single month to say again, God is good. That's part, maybe someone that lives in this town for 5 years and hears that, a dozen times every year, maybe 5 years down the road, they start to wonder, maybe he really is good. And so it's just the small things in so many ways are the better things if our heart is transformation. It just isn't always a quick return.
Yeah, 100%. And I think particularly in small places, I love that you even said, I think at some place a little bit back there about the Longview with people. And, one thing that is just a reality in rural, and we've talked to other people about this too, the reality of a rural spot is you're going to get multiple hearings with most people, right? You're not just bumping into somebody once. You're going to, and people in your church are going to get multiple hearings. So you get a chance to consistently over time. Because part of how you combat the cynicism is to say, no, this is who we said we care about you. We said we care about our community. And we didn't just do it once. We did it again and again and again. And at some point, people start to say, maybe they really do care about us, and they really do love us. They really do want, they really do think that Jesus has something to communicate to us about how community through him can be more than even, just, So it's really neat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you briefly shared with me, but I'd love to hear more about it. Can you share with us what your church has been working on recently with the most vulnerable in your community?
Sure. So this is what's cool is that we do a whole bunch of little things, and then people start dreaming dreams way bigger than I planned or anticipated. But earlier this year, really in January, there were a handful of people in the church who have been a part of just all of these ongoing, consistent ways of showing up for our community. You can't live in Belfair, Washington, or really on the West Coast in general, and not see that the housing crisis is just so significant, and it's only getting worse. And so we have so many houseless, unhoused neighbors. Right on the streets, but also so many living in RVs with no hookups and living in cars. And this is not an easy part of the world to be without a home in. No place is easy, but holy smokes. And so as people are engaging their neighbors more and more, the burden of the most vulnerable doesn't go away. It gets stronger and stronger. And so I actually had different people within the church. This was not my baby. This was not my dream. Begin coming to me and saying, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about the housing crisis? We've been doing all these things. How do we get deep into the place where our little town is most broken? And our little church I would say that on a Sunday morning, say we had 100 in the room, I think it's fair to say 70% of those don't have more than a high school degree, perhaps an associate's degree. So these are not people that are deeply knowledgeable about the way that government funding works, or how to go get the best grant, or social workers in our midst. These are folks who are working hard and living life, but they've got big hearts and big questions and big dreams. And so they're like, why can't our church? Nobody else is doing it. The government's not doing it here. Belfair gets overlooked all the time in funding. we need to start being the ones talking about how we can see like a tiny home village come up in our town. How can we 10 years, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, have an entire community right here in our backyard where the houseless are being housed and in community, and where we're seeing folks in recovery. And why not us? Which 9 years ago, the first thing, this is why not us, and I would have heard that first. But now people are saying, like, if it's not us, then who? Like, we have Jesus. We have the Spirit alive in us. We have people that are praying these prayers. Like, why would God not be able to use us for this? And so we've got this wonderful team of like a dozen people that are making field trips to see housing villages, and who are looking up how to apply for a grant, and just figuring out stuff that they never even had on their radar, just a few years ago, because they're learning to love their neighbors because they keep showing up for their neighbors. Yeah. And so we've got like these big long-term dreams of kind of housing, multi-housing villages for those who are unhoused. In the meantime, we have a grant that we've applied for that should be coming to term, or we should be receiving it very soon here. That's kind of step one in this process, where we are looking to have on our site one of those mobile shower laundry trailers. There's no free laundry or showers in our community, and there are so many people that live without either, and lots of rain and things that get wet and really nasty really fast. And so we should have half of the money coming as a gift, and then we'll need to raise the other half to have every day, however many volunteers we have available, at least weekly, if not multiple times a week, a place on site right here in the community where folks can come and get a hot shower and get their clothes cleaned and dried. And while they're here, that can become so many things. Our folks could prepare hot meals. Our children and youth could prepare brown bag lunches during their gatherings. There could be, special celebrations at holidays, and it could just grow and grow. But these are things. I mean, a laundry shower trailer, one of the cheapest ones, is $50,000. That would have never even been on our church's radar not that long ago. We're looking at, we have a couple $100 to spend here or there, but people are dreaming the big dreams that tap into the heart of God. And when we dream those dreams, it turns out that God shows us who He is. And that is that invitation into abundance, is that we have a God who is abundantly good and abundantly in love with His people, and a God who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. And so if our hearts are aligned with His heart for our neighbors, the resources become secondary, and so it's just very exciting to see the people of the church being the ones who are now dreaming the dreams and making it come to be alongside God. And it's not just coming from the pastor, which is very cool.
That's amazing. I love that story. I think it's a real example of how, like, we can't outgive God. Like, sometimes we try to come up with, strategies on how to come up with the money for, various things. But when God really places it in our hearts, He'll make a way. And usually it's not in a way that we would expect. And I love that we can tell those stories, because I think it's a reminder when we go through the hard times, like, no, God really does show up when He wants something to happen. So I love the story.
And it's so beautiful to hear the way that, people kind of practicing this practical love for neighbor is contagious in a way where instead of being something you're like, oh, we're going to do another Saturday where we got to go and do this thing, all of a sudden it's like, what could we do? And what could we do bigger? Like, hey, maybe we could do this. I mean, you're talking like a much higher level of commitment it takes to do something like that. But people are all of a sudden, because they've seen how much beauty and how good it is to love the people around them in little ways, it's like, oh, these big ways. Yeah, this is, if we thought about this with human eyes, we would be like, this is a crazy idea. We should not do this. But as soon as we start to see with spirit eyes and just see, like, oh no, God, we could really see God do something really neat here. That's so cool.
Yeah, I love the Westminster Catechism. I'm not Presbyterian, but I love that the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And I love that reminder that our life with God is supposed to be enjoyable. Like we're supposed to have fun with this God stuff,
Yeah.
And it is so much fun to love God, and it is so much fun to see others awaken to how much God loves them, and so it should be the good stuff, right? That
Amen.
we get to go out and show God's goodness to our neighbors. But when you force people to do things that are not a part of how they're wired, like what for me growing up, and it's just the telltale story, but the knocking on doors or handing out tracts and some people, I've heard people that got saved through that. God moves in mysterious ways, but people feel very uncomfortable, very awkward. If I feel awkward, the person receiving it probably feels awkward. Why not just have fun with loving people? Why not just think about like, man, I would love a free donut on a Monday morning. If I would love it, they probably would love it. That's not awkward. Like, why did we make it so awkward? Like, since when did just saying that God is good have to be this weird, strange, hokey thing, Like, if I would like it and I can attach the love of Jesus to it, then let's do it. So we overcomplicate things, I think, and I don't know why.
We get in our own way sometimes.
Yeah, no doubt.
Oh man, this has been such a great conversation. I would like to finish by asking you to maybe provide some encouragement, like for all our pastors and leaders that are listening. What is some encouragement you can give to us in shifting our focus outside of the four walls of our church building?
Yeah, I think I would reiterate almost what we just said, but have fun with it. Choose something that you're already having fun with and invite your neighbor. I love hiking. I love the outdoors. On the times I have free time, I want to be in nature anyway. So one of the first things I did here is I started a Belfair hiking group. Does anybody else want to hike? Problem was I was a single female, and the first 2 respondents were kind of creeper guys. So that didn't last. But the idea of it, I was like, I'm already doing this. I like it. Let's just extend the invitation one step further. And, know that might open the way to really meaningful conversations. And so enjoy, make it fun, make loving your neighbors fun. Look at what you do have. Our facilities. I mean, sometimes we overlook that. We've got a space where people can gather. Be generous with that space. We've got the Boy Scouts and the weight loss group and an immigration service that meets in our space, and Kiwanis meets in our space. And anytime people, just want to meet with a friend and don't want to pay $20 for a cup of coffee, come meet in our space. Yes, this is shared space. So worry less about the carpet and the stains, and, use our space generously. Empower the people to know that they are the best gift that our church has for the world is our people going out with stories of transformation. And so celebrate our people's stories, highlight their stories, help them share their stories on Sundays. And so then on Monday, they already know the story because they just shared it. And so, celebrate our people's stories, point out what God's doing in their life. And as they see that, they're excited to tell it. And so look at what we already have. We have people in our midst who are being transformed. Send them out to tell the good news of transformation. Look at the budget. We may not have $10,000. Do we have 1,000? Wow, look, there's some fun ideas for $1,000. And so just look at what we have and have a ball with it.
That's so good. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, Jamie, we really appreciate it.
It's been fun to be with you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And it's so inspiring to hear some of the stuff that's going on in your churches. And I'm so excited to hear how other churches are going to hear about that and get those creative juices flowing for how we can really make our communities the kind of places Jesus wants them to be.
Rule of Renewal podcast is brought to you by Fresh Expressions and the Ascent Movement. Fresh Expressions is a worldwide movement of everyday missionaries who want to see churches thrive in the places we live, eat, work, and play by leveraging the creativity and endurance of the inherited church. To learn a simple 5-phase process for starting a new expression of church that works in small towns, big cities, and everywhere in between, go to freshexpressions.com/how-to-start.
To connect with this podcast, you can email us at podcasts@freshexpressions.com. Rural Renewal Podcast is hosted by Kathleen Blackie and Chris Blackie. It's edited by Joel Limbowen and produced by Kathleen Blackie and Chris Morton. Our senior director is Dr. Christopher Backert.
If you have learned something or been encouraged by this podcast, please help us spread the word. You can give us a review on Apple Music or Spotify and share this episode on social media.
Let us end with this prayer for town and rural area from the Book of Common Prayer. Lord Christ, when you came among us, you proclaimed the kingdom of God in villages, towns, and lonely places. Grant that your presence and power may be known throughout this land. Have mercy upon all of us who live and work in rural areas, and grant that all the people may give thanks to you for food and drink and all other bodily necessities of life. Grant those who labor to produce them and honor the land and water from which these good things come. All this we ask in your holy name. Amen.